Holy shit, how do we miss this? We're two idiots with a compass wandering in the woods. I'm amazed we found it. Cryptid was written and directed by Brad Rago, who did The Killing of Jacob Marr as well as some shorts. This stars Nicholas Barowdi, Ellen Adair, and Chopper Burnett or Burnett. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that last name. I do apologize in advance. They are citizens of a small rural town in Maine where bodies are starting to pile up because of some animal attacks. Animal attacks where they can't figure out if it's a bear, a very, very large chicken, possibly, somebody that Duran Duran told us about when they're hungry like the wolf. They're not exactly sure what's going on. Sheriff Murdoch, played by Mr. Burnett or Burnett, is doing his own investigation, while Nicholas, his character Max, is a journalist, a freelance journalist that has his own past, as talked about a little bit later on, and he has a friendship with Harriet, played by Ellen. And they have to come together right now over me. Solve this mystery before more bodies pile up. Okay, enough of that. Basically, they have to use their ingenuity, their smarts, and also a little bit of blind luck to figure out, is it actually just a bear? Is there something more sinister going on? Is it something possibly really, really far out there, where it's going to kind of tie into a whole horror movie, monster movie motif? Well, obviously, if you know anything about horror movies, it's clearly going to be something like the latter. But the one thing I will say about this movie and about Mr. Rago is he actually does take time developing the characters and letting the story build and everything. Even though it is a fairly simple story, it's in the vein of monster movies from the 50s, 60s, and even the 70s. With a less is more approach, where you don't find out what's going on for quite a while. And that's a good approach. Not often an approach that a lot of movies take these days, indie horror or otherwise. They have to just feel like they have to throw everything at the goddamn screen. This takes a little bit of time to develop the characters and let things bubble up a bit. And when we finally do find out what is going on, we're like, oh, okay, cool. Is it a little bit typical? Yeah, there are some familiar tropes, and there are some moments where the characters do monumentally stupid things. But there are also a few moments that aren't all that bad. Actually, a few moments that are kind of tense. There's some good atmospheric work here as far as music, as far as rain, lots of rain. That ties into the plot a little bit later. And the scenery is very picturesque. I will say one thing that kind of goes against this movie a little bit is the fact that it's a little bit long in the tooth, ironically. That's really the only negative I have for this. This is almost 2 hours, and to me, this is my opinion. I'm not knocking the vision of the director, writer, and I'm not knocking what the actors did. The acting's decent enough for what it is. And since it's at times your typical, animal attack movie, and it has to go on some familiar tropes and has to have characters explain things because it's taking that more, less is more approach. Sometimes some of the dialogue scenes get a little bit long in the tooth, and it does get to where it's almost 2 hours, and it probably only need to be about 90 minutes. That's my personal opinion. There were some dialogue scenes, while I understand what they were going for, weren't always necessary. It does end up being one of the better offerings from indie horror for the past couple years, because at least while playing on familiar tropes and cliches, it at least has a little bit more fun with it. Now, once it does get to the more revealing stuff, some of it works, some of it doesn't. I'm certainly not going to say I hated this movie. I did not hate this movie. I somewhat liked it. I certainly encourage people to give this a shot because it's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. It is just a little bit long. But there are some good dialogue scenes, there are some good attack scenes, and there's off-screen animal violence. Thankfully, it's off-screen. Otherwise, I would have had to downgrade it, like I have downgraded some other movies, because I'm not for animal violence, but it plays into this movie, so I can't fault it there. It has enough good stuff to it, where even with the faults, you can give this a chance and kind of enjoy it. Is it a great movie? No. Is it a good movie? At times. Is it a bad movie? No, it's not bad at all. I would actually encourage people to watch this as far as a different look, a different feel. Some of it feels familiar, some of it feels fresh, and sure, the characters do some stupid stuff, but that's what you're going to get in horror monster movies, and the way they explain it is at least kind of nice. They actually take their time with it, a good approach. Still could have trimmed some time off of it, but it was what it was. It was fine for what it was. So that's really all I have to say about that. I'm going to get into spoilers here in a little bit. It's on Amazon for like, I think, $7 after tax, and I mean, it was worth renting. I mean, compared to some movies I have spent twice as much money on, this at least was a decent little offering. Let's see what the writer-director Brad Rego can do in the future, and the acting certainly isn't all that bad. So I'm going to get into spoilers. That's your fair warning, just so you know. 3, 2, 1, spoilers. Okay, so basically this whole thing about Max's backstory, him and Ellen's character Harriet, they come together and they're talking. They have a bit of a tense relationship basically because Harriet is going to be taking a job in Boston, but she's staying behind to help Max with this whole deal. That ends up kind of being her undoing. Sorry, Ellen Adair's character does get killed. And Max kind of is a bit of a user because while he has suffered loss, his dad did deforestation and died after 32 years on the job. His mother died of ovarian cancer, and his fiance passed away. His fiance that was raised as from a child by Sheriff Murdoch, Chopper Burnett, or Burnett, however you say it. And that's a scene at one point where they kind of have a bit of an argument later in the movie when the sheriff doesn't necessarily want to believe what's going on, even though there are mysterious holes in the ground, and they're having to wonder, well, what the hell's going on? What kind of, animal is doing this? Because it's clearly not a bear. There's a guy attacked a bit early on, and you don't see much of this creature for a while. What it ends up being is some kind of weird reptilian-like creature. It almost looked like a bird at one point, like Nelly Furtado was like a bird, only fly away, and I don't know where my home is. They don't know where their soul is. I don't think those are the lyrics. Ends up being kind of slimy and, reptilian and everything, and it's from a bygone era. There is a bit of a message about deforestation, bringing out creatures from under the earth. And Ellen Adair's character does meet an untimely end, suddenly. Like, just, I don't want to even say out of nowhere, it sort of makes sense, but it's just like, boom, oh, she's suddenly being killed, and the person in the car that was with her, I guess, is just not going to say anything. Also, one thing to note about this movie is supposed to start filming in April 2020, but because of the onset pandemic, got delayed for 6 months. And so the movie apparently has sat on the shelf for a while because it just got released on streaming about a week ago, and that's a little bit much. But I will say the exploration scenes with Max and Harriet doing their own, research and figuring out this stuff and figuring out the footprints and the weird stuff and the holes in the ground and all that, looking like a fool with the holes in the ground. It ends up turning out that it ties in the rain so they can cover their tracks and the ground gets softer so they can burst through and they can drag people down into these holes where they can drag the bodies down. And it's animal, vegetable, mineral, doesn't matter. They will kill. They will take the guts out. They will just do that. They feast from October, November, and even sometime in December. And then they stop. And then they move on to another area. And then they rotate back around 7 to 10 years. And some people may remember. Some people may have forgotten like that. It's sort of like Jeepers Creepers, except without Victor Salva involved. Fuck Victor Salva. If you know, you know. But they are doing their own investigation. There's one point where they kind of hint at a romance. They didn't do a romance. I will give Brad Rego much credit for doing that and not falling on that familiar trope. Though you can clearly tell they care about each other. And then there's more stuff about, these weird creatures. And then eventually there's this hunting party after Harriet gets killed. The sheriff goes with one guy who got his horse killed and the deputy. And they're going along with Max. Max ends up sinking into one of the holes after one of the guys ends up getting killed. He gets attacked by a couple of the creatures because one of the creatures laid some eggs. Oh boy, eggs. That's not something that you want from a prehistoric creature from a bygone era that wants to repopulate and take over, this area and possibly the planet. You don't want that. But he ends up getting attacked by some creatures. This is kind of where the indie part falls, it kind of hampers it a little bit because they have to use a lot of shadowy shots for the fact that the movie obviously didn't have a very big budget. I'm not faulting that. Sometimes less is more. But eventually, when you have to show something, sometimes like, okay, the reveal is, it was what it was. But again, throwback, not all that bad. It ends up, what ends up happening is Max ends up using the claws of the creature that he kills to climb up out of this because it's almost like, a slimy tunnel. And he manages to get rescued by Charlie, aka Sheriff Murdoch. And he's in a hospital and he says, shit, we have to go back. Why do we have to go back? There's eggs there. What do you mean there's eggs there? And then suddenly they're back. And all the eggs have hatched, and now they won't come back until spring, and they'll come back with even bigger numbers, with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the reptilians. It doesn't end up being all that bad. I will give it that much credit. Again, it is long in the tooth. This did not need to be 2 hours, and in fact, that's the biggest detriment towards it. I waffled as far as a grade and everything. I'm going to give it a B minus because it had enough positives, but I think I would have given it a higher grade had maybe some of the fat been trimmed. Now, I'm not faulting. The movie is fine for what it was. B minus for the entertainment and the less is more approach. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ricklin. I'll see you soon.